Bobby Fischer. The name itself, it's just legendary. To some, he was the greatest chess player who ever lived, a lone American hero who shattered the Soviet chess machine right at the height of the Cold War. But to others, he was a paranoid, hateful recluse who praised terrorism and spewed the most vile anti-Semitic venom. The tragedy of Bobby Fischer is that both of those things are true. So how does a guy go from national icon to, well, to an international outcast?
You know what? Let's just start at the end. This is what Bobby Fischer, a man born in Chicago and raised in Brooklyn, said on a radio show just hours after the September 11th attacks. It's a shocking, hateful thing to say, and for so many people who remembered him as a hero, it was the final, incomprehensible chapter in a long, bizarre public collapse. See, the man who said this wasn't some nobody. He was a globally recognized genius. And to even begin to understand his fall, we have to go back. We have to understand his incredible, unbelievable rise.
Because see, 30 years before he said that, this was the Bobby Fischer the world knew. This brilliant, intense 29-year-old was everywhere, on the cover of magazines, a guest on The Tonight Show. He was a household name. He wasn't just some chess player, he was a bona fide Cold War hero. So the question that just haunts his legacy is, what on earth happened? How do you get from this guy in the picture to the man who was happy about 9/11? Okay, so Fischer's story, it all starts in Brooklyn. When he was just 6, his older sister taught him the rules of chess, and while she lost interest pretty quickly, for Bobby, it was everything. Those 64 squares became his entire world, a universe of pure logic and fierce competition that he could completely control. A world he was born to rule. And his rise, it was just meteoric. It was staggering. At just 13 years old, he plays this game. A game so good, so brilliant, they immediately call it the game of the century. 13. A year later, he's 14, and he's the US champion. By 15, the youngest grandmaster in history. These weren't just achievements. This was him telling the entire world, I'm here. And he didn't slow down. He just kept getting better and better. Leading up to his big shot at the world title, he went on this absolute rampage. In the 1971 tournaments to decide the next challenger, he's playing against the best of the best, and he beats 2 world-class grandmasters with perfect 6-0 scores. It doesn't happen. It's unheard of. All told, he wins 20 games in a row against the global elite. This wasn't just dominance, it was total devastation. You have to remember what was going on at the time. The stakes were just massive. Since 1948, the World Chess Championship was Soviet property. Period. It was a state-run machine, a symbol of their intellectual might. So Fischer wasn't just some guy playing a board game. He was playing for his country. He was David, and the entire Soviet chess empire was Goliath. And that brings us to Reykjavik, Iceland, the summer of '72. This was it, the match of the century. You've got the champ, Boris Spassky, a total product of that Soviet system, a powerful, respected player. And then you've got Fischer, the unpredictable, volatile, genius challenger from America. But here's the kicker. For all of Fischer's insane dominance against everyone else, there was one guy he had literally never beaten, Boris Spassky. Look at their record, 5 games. Spassky won 3, 2 were draws, Fischer, 0 wins. So even though the world thought Fischer was the favorite, their personal history told a different story. He was the underdog in this one-on-one rivalry, and that just added this whole other layer of psychological pressure.
But of course, with Fischer, it's never that simple. Before a single pawn was pushed, the whole match almost fell apart. Because of him. He complained about everything. The lights, the chairs, the audience, you name it. He demanded more money. It got so bad that some British banker literally doubled the prize fund himself just to get him to play. And then the US Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, personally calls him up, basically begging him to play for his country. And even after all that, he forfeits game 2. Why? He said the cameras were too loud.
So can you imagine all this hype, all this buildup, and right out of the gate, Fischer is down 2-0, and one of those losses was a forfeit. The world thought he was just cracking under the pressure. The Soviets were probably laughing. It looked like it was all over before it even really started. And then the genius showed up. See, Fischer was known for playing the same openings over and over. You knew what was coming. But in Game 6, he did something nobody expected. For the first time ever in a series game, he plays the Queen's Gambit. Spassky was floored. It was this incredible psychological move, and Fischer played the game perfectly. He was basically telling Spassky, you have no idea what I'm going to do next. And just like that, the entire momentum of the match flipped. After 21 games of just unbelievable chess and intense mind games, Bobby Fischer did it. He won. The final score, 12.5 to 8.5. The Soviet monopoly was broken. A kid from Brooklyn was the new king of chess. He came back to America a hero, a superstar who'd won a major battle in the Cold War all by himself. He was literally on top of the world. And it was the last time he'd ever play a competitive public chess game in his prime. Right. So at the absolute peak of his fame, with millions of dollars in endorsements just waiting for him, Bobby Fischer just disappears. He walks away. The hero vanishes. And the man who eventually comes back out of the shadows, he's a completely different person. So in 1975, it's time for him to defend his title against the next Soviet challenger, a young guy named Anatoly Karpov. But Fischer comes up with this list of demands, all these rules about how the match should be played. And he says they're non-negotiable. When the World Chess Federation, FIDE, won't agree to every single one, he just refuses to play. He forfeits his crown. Just like that, the greatest player on the planet gives up his title and goes into this self-imposed exile that lasts for decades. And when he finally did start talking again, it wasn't about chess. It was through these bizarre, rambling interviews on tiny little radio stations. And all he talked about was this venomous, obsessive anti-Semitism. The irony is just staggering. Fischer himself was born to Jewish parents. His behavior just got more and more bizarre. He started denying his own Jewish heritage, collecting Nazi memorabilia. There was even a report that he slept with a portrait of Hitler over his bed. Then, in 1992, he comes out of hiding for this multi-million-dollar rematch against Spassky. The catch? It was in Yugoslavia, which was under U.S. sanctions at the time. That one move made him a fugitive from his own country. He spends years on the run, gets arrested in Japan in 2004, and then, in this final weird twist of fate, Iceland, the country where he had his greatest moment, gives him citizenship. And that's where he lived until he died in 2008, just a bitter, isolated man. So you have to ask why. What happened? This isn't just a celebrity having a rough patch. This was a complete and total personality collapse. To try and understand it, psychologists and biographers have basically tried to perform a psychological autopsy on him. What could possibly drive America's hero to the absolute edge of madness? I mean, how do you turn from a chess genius into a paranoid, hate-filled fugitive? The answers aren't simple, but a lot of the clues might go all the way back to the very beginning of his life. One of the biggest pieces of this whole puzzle might be the mystery of who his real father was. The man on his birth certificate, Hans Gerhard Fischer, he was gone when Bobby was just a baby. But FBI files on his mother, Regina, they strongly point to his biological father being this man, Paul Nemeny. Nemeny was a brilliant Hungarian Jewish physicist, and just like Bobby, he was a genius, but he also suffered from very severe mental illness. So you start to see all these potential triggers stacking up. You've got a childhood marked by abandonment, confusion about who his father even was. Then you have this possible genetic link to mental illness from his brilliant but very troubled biological father. On top of all that, you pile on the insane pressure of being a Cold War symbol, an entire nation's hopes resting on your shoulders. And then, maybe the biggest thing of all, think about this. What do you do when your entire life, your whole reason for being, is to achieve one single goal, becoming world champion? And then, you do it. For Fischer, once he got to the top of the mountain, there was nowhere else to climb. His life's work was done. And that huge empty space, it got filled with paranoia and hate.
And what's really spooky is that we've seen this movie before. About a century earlier, America's first great chess genius, a guy named Paul Morphy, he followed an almost identical, tragic path. He completely dominated the chess world, was hailed as a hero, and then he just abruptly quit the game and spent the rest of his life lost in paranoia and delusion. The parallels are they're uncanny. It really makes you wonder if there's some kind of dangerous link between this all-consuming type of genius and a fragile mind.
So where does that leave us? How are we supposed to remember Bobby Fischer? His legacy is a total paradox. It's split right down the middle, between the artist and the man. He's impossible to admire, but he's also impossible to ignore. On the one hand, you just can't deny his contribution to chess. It's immeasurable. He completely changed the game with his intense preparation and his absolute refusal to lose.
His book, My 60 Memorable Games, is still a Bible for any serious player. He created a chess boom in America out of thin air. That part of his legacy is solid as a rock.
But that genius will forever be overshadowed by the darkness and the hate of his later life. So we're left with this question. Was he a flawed hero whose mind just broke under pressure that you and I can't even imagine? Was he a tragic genius whose mental illness finally won? Or was he both? The story of Bobby Fischer doesn't give us any easy answers. Just a really powerful cautionary tale about the razor-thin edge that can separate genius from madness.